Hello, and welcome to another edition of XPRT Talk, brought to you by Newristics. I'm Lisa Baer, and I'll be hosting this interview. Today, I'm speaking with Samantha Burstein, who is an Associate Director of Client Services at Newristics, and she is also our resident expert on the topic of modern dating. Before we begin, I do want to note that this is a fun topic and one that we could very easily steer off course. We're going to focus our attention on how irrational decision-making processes are playing a role in the world of modern dating. So with that, let's begin. Thank you, Samantha, for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Lisa.
So, as expected, the field of dating has changed over time, and like most other things, that process has evolved into a virtual world rather than the physical one. This is especially true in the time of COVID. How has that shift away from relying solely on face-to-face interactions played into our decision-making processes for modern dating?
That's a great question, a great way to start off our conversation. So there's two main heuristics that are really playing a part in our decision-making processes when we're in the field of dating. And the first heuristic that's really shifted over the last 20 years or so is one that we call customization bias. And what customization bias is that humans prefer to customize their options even if they don't necessarily desire any customization. So for instance, with the realm of modern dating right now, we're able to customize our platform first and foremost. So whether that means going on Christian Mingle, Tinder, JDate, or Farmers Only, whatever suits your fancy, you're basically able to customize your options based on your preference. When in reality, when you're dating or in the dating world, you're not actually, you're basing your choices off of whether or not you have a connection, not whether or not they fit your lifestyle. So being able to customize has really been perpetuated throughout modern dating today. And that doesn't just stick to the platform itself, it goes beyond that because you have filters, you have different settings that you can put in place that will further hone in on your desired choices that you think that you want or that you're looking for in a partner. So that's the first heuristic. The second heuristic that's really playing a part in modern dating is what we call choice overload. And that's really when there's so many different options, usually people end up not deciding anything. And because we've made that transition from face-to-face dating to online dating, your pool of options has exponentially grown. You have even though you're able to customize and whittle down on who you want to see as a formidable partner, the pool of options and potential suitors is much larger than we ever had 20 years ago. You're able to look at people from 20 to 50 miles away, and even though that customization is there, the amount of options you have is a little bit overwhelming, and it would cause a lot of people to not necessarily invest in a particular option at one point.
So my daughter and her friends have told me there aren't a lot of options out there for the 25 to 35 range, contrary to what you just said. How are they unable to find a suitable candidate with all the options available and the customization aspect?
Yeah, so it's a really good point, because as you just said so clearly, given the fact that we're able to customize so much and the fact that we have so many options, you would think that you are better able to find a partner, but that's not really the case. And there's three heuristics that are really playing a part there. And the first one is what we call open option bias. And that is where people like to keep their options open because it makes them feel more in control. So the fact of the choice overload, having so many options, kind of plays in tandem with this open option bias, in the sense of, because we have so many options, we don't necessarily want to invest in any particular one option. So by keeping our options open and almost in a way playing the field, we're freely able to jump from interaction to interaction with little to no repercussions and no investment on the return either. You're not giving too much. So that's the first thing that's happening. The second thing is what we call distinction bias, and that's actually my personal favorite heuristic, because distinction bias means is that we're better able to evaluate the differences between two options when we're evaluating them simultaneously versus when we're evaluating them separately. And in modern dating right now, you're seeing profile by profile, you're swiping left, swiping right. It's almost similar to walking into a Best Buy and trying to pick out a television, where if you bring a television home with you and you don't like it and then you want to return it and then you bring a new television home, it's much more difficult for you to discern the differences between the two TVs versus you walking into Best Buy and seeing all those TVs laid out in front of you and being able to see, okay, well, that color is better, that pixel count is better. That's kind of what's happening here in modern dating, but in a different sense, because again, we're seeing these profiles one at a time. So we're not necessarily able to draw distinctions from one person's page to another unless you match. And once you match, then you have this whole portfolio, so to speak, of people that you can discern what is the differences between them. And that leads into the third heuristic that's really playing a part as to why people feel like they're not able to find suitable partners. And that's what we call elimination by aspects. And that particular heuristic is actually, or has been, prevalent throughout the history of dating overall, because what that heuristic tells us is that we determine a set of standards that we are looking for in whatever decision that we're making, and for this case, dating. So we have a set of standards or a list that we want our potential partner to meet. And so we are eliminating people by that list. And what's happening with technology and the influx of technology in modern dating is that ability to eliminate by aspects is further perpetuated through technology, because we have so many options, we're able to customize, we're able to draw distinctions from different pages and so on and so forth. So we're able to really eliminate people on these set of standards that we're setting for ourselves. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that's gonna lead you to your partner, because just because I want someone who's over 6 foot tall doesn't mean that someone who's 5'11" or 5'10" or whatever isn't equally, or if not more, of a better match for me going forward in my dating life. So it's really interesting how that technology has been able to further extend our ability to eliminate by these various aspects that we think are important when we're looking for a partner.
So virtually like a wish list.
Yeah.
Of what you're,
They need to be funny, they need to be smart, they need to be tall, all these things that really you won't know until you actually meet the person and get to know them.
Right.
Yeah.
I imagine if I weren't happily married and was still in the dating pool, if I used one of these platforms and found my ideal candidate, that it would be hard to actually believe they are who they say they are, as in, we've all heard it, catfishing. Like, talk to me about that.
Yeah, catfishing really came into the realm of our modern world within, I think, like the last 15 years or so, maybe sooner, I don't know. But again, a really good point, because we do have this ability to almost hide behind the screen and avoid real-time rejection. When you would date 15, 20 years ago, you would meet someone, and if they just didn't fit the bill, then you could just walk out or whatever it may be. But with this one particular heuristic that plays a part. It's called sensationalism bias. And what sensationalism bias tells us is that we're choosing to report on extraordinary events rather than the day-to-day mundane things that really make us who we are. So we're able to almost present a better version of ourselves than what we actually are. And it's not just, it's everyone's doing it. And it's so natural of a tendency to do, because you do have that ability to avoid real-time rejection. So you get to choose what pictures you post on your profile. You get to choose what little blurbs you want to add in, what little quirky quips to put on your page, and to really accentuate who you are as an individual. And through that, we're boasting ourselves up as something more than what we actually are. And that works especially well with people who aren't really, who aren't socially as engaging as they'd like to be. So if you want to be more witty and charming, you can via these platforms, because you're allowed enough time to respond. They can't see your nonverbals, your social cues. So it's not only the initial match that you're getting this sense of, oh, this person seems amazing. It's even beyond that. It's within the interactions. You can still, you know, present yourselves in this better light and as this better version of yourself. And that doesn't actually, you know, come to light or is revealed until you really actually meet the person. And that's assuming that you do meet the person, because a lot of times you match with people and you just don't end up meeting ever. So yeah, it's a lot.
Well, yes, because back in the day, you know, 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago at this point, you would be at the bar and your persona is the makeup that you put on. Yep. And the clothes that you wore. And, you know, you couldn't put that best picture forward. You were as you were seen for the most part. So with all that being said, how do you weed through what's real and what's a catfish? I mean, if people are able to present better versions of themselves and not be called out immediately, then how do people even trust the process? Are you eliminating good people for the wrong reasons?
Yeah, no, and I think you made an interesting point there too, because like you said, you would just go to the bar back in the day and you either what you are is what you're presenting is what you are. But really what happens is, as you get to know someone more, you're learning more about them, and you're further deciding whether or not you want to continue with them. And there's one heuristic that's called interview illusion. And that's where humans believe we know someone after only a brief interaction. And so even if you meet someone at the bar, you're like, you can almost tell based on his mannerisms or her mannerisms what type of person you're dealing with much quicker than you would online. But online, all you have is this nonverbal communication and just texting. So it's very easy to almost have false impressions of a person and in a way jump to conclusions, because you know you're basing on brief interactions whether or not you like a person. So let's say you make a match with someone and they fit the bill, they hit all your assets that you want, or all your attributes that you're looking for. And at the end of the day, their one-liner to you is a little off-putting or just kind of rude, but in their eyes, they were trying to be flirtatious or witty and bantering. And there's a lot of miscommunication that goes on, not just on these platforms, but in emails and text messages and so on and so forth. So it is really interesting how we're able to, you know, jump to those conclusions through just assuming we know the person after a brief interaction. And then once we get past that brief interaction, there's a heuristic called fundamental attribution error. And that's really when we're explaining the behaviors of others, we're overestimating the effect of their personality and underestimating the impact of the situation. So for example, you see a page on a profile and they have all these great one-liners, like they're smart, you can tell that they're active and things like that, but they have absolutely no pictures, or they have pictures and it's always them in a group. Fundamental attribution error, what we've learned is we're attributing their personality to these attributes of how they're presenting themselves, when it's really just situational factors. They could just not have any good photos of themselves, so they didn't want to put that on the page. But if I was swiping and I saw all these great things about this person and no photos, you'd be concerned. You'd be like, okay, this is obvious. Yeah, red flag. This is a catfish. I'm gonna swipe right. I'm not engaging on this, even though that they could have been the perfect match. So we're really attributing these things and putting them on top of their personality, and it goes beyond just the profile. It also goes on their dictation. A lot of times, nowadays people use emojis, and that can get convoluted if you use too many emojis. Some people think it's a turnoff. Same with grammar. If you don't use proper grammar, I know a lot of my friends who, if they don't use the proper form of your or their, it's a no-go. There's no coming back from that. When in reality, it could have just been a typo. It could have been a voice to text type situation, or they just really have bad grammar. But you're eliminating people, and to your point, the good people, potentially good people, based on these false attributions that really don't hold up in court or in the romantic world, or whatever you want to call it.
So it almost sounds as if this doesn't work as well as we're hoping. Is that the correct assumption?
It's an easy assumption, yes. I mean, I won't say that it doesn't work all the time, because I know people where it does work. So it does work sometimes, but does it work more often than not? Hard to say, because it really depends on what your expectations are going into these platforms. There's a heuristic called outcome bias, and that's really where we're judging our decision based on the eventual outcome that could transpire. So if you're going into these dating sites with the idea of, I'm not going to find anybody, I'm just in it for the instant gratification, then you'd lean on more of the heuristic of instant return, where you're just looking for, that instant gratification on your investment. You don't really want to invest much time. You want that instant gratification, for lack of a better word. And so you're just almost like window shopping. You're swiping through just so you can make matches and almost in a sense feel good about yourself. And that's totally fine. Totally fine. Again, it just depends on what your expectation is going into it. There's also disappointment aversion. And that's when, if you think that an outcome is going to at all yield undesirable results, you're going to avoid that situation. There's a lot of people that I know out there who just won't even go on these platforms. And then there's other people who will go on these platforms expecting something, thinking that they're going to get this outcome, trying to be the best version of themselves, not portray some alternative form. And at the end, they end up getting disappointed. And that can, in one sense, cause a little bit of a jaded view on how people continue throughout these experiences and on these platforms. So again, it really just depends on expectations and setting them properly. And also, almost in a sense, when you set them low. And I hate to say that because it does put a little bit of a negative spin on it, but at the same time, like, you're presenting a version of yourself, they're presenting a version of themselves. It's very difficult to make that work. I'm not saying it's impossible, but with everything that we just discussed, yeah, it plays a part in making people not really want to engage in those websites.
Well, okay, based on all your expertise and the research that you've done in this field, what in the future do you envision for dating? If we were to meet in 10 years and do Expert Talk 2, modern dating then, what would change? Would this improve? Would it get worse? What's your take on this?
Yeah, and it's funny because you said this at the top of our discussion in the sense of, COVID. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I have absolutely no idea. And with COVID playing a part, I think the situation is only going to be, perpetuated. It's going to get heightened in a sense of us relying more so on these social media platforms than we ever had before because we're quarantined, right? We can't necessarily go to the bar or to a coffee shop and meet up. We have to rely on these platforms in order to meet our potential suitors. So I think that's going to be on the up and up. But again, anything can happen. We're in a very pivotal time in history right now. So the last thing I'll probably say is let's talk in 2035 or 2025 and we'll see how things go and we'll take it from there.
Well, Samantha, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. All right. Bye.
Bye.